My name is Graeme and I work for Journey Canada in the role of communications, doing some of the media relations and communications work for Journey Canada, along with running some of the courses and programs that Journey does in Calgary. And I'm joined by Tony Dolfo-Smith. Tony, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Tony, and I am the Executive Director of Journey Canada. I've been doing this work for 30 years, and I'm based in Vancouver.
So part of what Tony and I wanted to talk about, or what the EFC has asked us to do, is talk a little bit about Bill C-6, which is the bill being considered by the Canadian Parliament right now, that is a bill that is designed to ban conversion therapy. And so we wanted to talk a little bit about that and the impact that we think it's going to have on our ministry and on our lives, actually. So we thought, for those who are not terribly familiar with C-6, we would talk a little bit about the content of the bill, and the really critical piece of the legislation, or the really critical part of it, is its definition of conversion therapy. And so I think if you're familiar at all with conversion therapy, you think about these horrible practices of exposing people to electroshock or abuse and various types of things. But the definition in the legislation actually goes a lot further than that. And so in the legislation, it says that conversion therapy is a practice, treatment, or service designed to change a person's sexual orientation to heterosexual or gender identity to cisgender, or to repress or reduce non-heterosexual attraction or sexual behavior. And that's one of the most important things in the legislation, because you can hear that it's not just about changing people's sexual feelings or their attractions, but actually it's about changing sexual behavior, and it sort of bans any effort to change sexual behavior. But as Christians, of course, we know that our sexuality, our sexual behavior is subject to Scripture and to our beliefs and to the testimony of the church over the last 2,000 years. And so there's some concern, particularly about that phrase sexual behavior. And so a lot of the concern comes from that piece about gender identity and also that piece about sexual behavior. So Tony, I just wanted to ask you, I know that you've been around, you just mentioned you've been around for 30 years. And so tell us a little bit of your story and a little bit of your own perspective on conversion therapy.
Yeah, I actually have experienced same-sex attraction my whole life. And so it's a central part of my story. I knew from when I was very young that I was attracted to my own gender. I grew up in South Africa, and so I grew up at a time when really we didn't speak about homosexuality or sexuality in general. And so for me growing up, I was very aware of the fact that I had these feelings that I couldn't talk about, but I also knew the experience of being a racial minority. So a lot of my experience growing up, my experience into adulthood, was really influenced by being a minority in a minority. I grew up in a Christian home, and in our home, we believed in the biblical creation story. We believed in God's creation of male and female. We believed that marriage was between a man and a woman. And of course, as a young boy, as a young man, this created a lot of tension in me because I didn't know quite what to believe, because I felt one way, but I was being told that this was absolutely illegal. And so a lot of my late teenage years and my early 20s was really a search to try and find out what I needed to do to either change my orientation or to live with it. And I spoke to many, many people, and conversion therapy was actually recommended to me by a pastor. And so I sort of willingly went, thinking that somehow I was going to become completely heterosexual at the end. But it dawned on me pretty early on in the process that my orientation was actually not going to change, and that I remained attracted to my same gender. And I can today, in looking back, I can see how this can be very destructive to a young person to be coerced into actually changing their orientation. I continued asking lots of questions. I spoke with community activists who are in the LGBTQ community, wasn't called that then. I spoke with leaders in the church, and I tried lots of things. I tried sort of acting as a heterosexual man, but I also was in a 2-year relationship uh, with a male partner. Eventually, I came to the place where I wanted to make a decision for myself, and I decided to really prioritize my religious identity and my beliefs, and to live them out, even in the middle of the conflict I was feeling. Um, and in doing so, in deciding that, naming myself as a gay man, but making the choices that were in alignment with my religious beliefs, it really relieved a huge amount of shame and anxiety for me. And I have no illusions or no shame in saying I am a gay man. But I needed help doing that, and to living out what I believed. And I had lots of people who walked that with me. Eventually, I found that I wanted to actually walk with others and help them walk out and live honestly and in love. And this is what I did in the founding of Journey. And this is what Journey really does: walks with people who have made this choice. Um, and I think it's important for people like myself, particularly young people, to have the option to voluntarily follow a similar path to what I did. I think that the current bill's definition of conversion therapy is very, very vague. And I personally think that simple exclusions from the definition of conversion therapy can really ensure that things like what I found to be life-giving really can be there for other people. I believe that by making these simple changes, I think people will have the chance to have the same experience as what I've been privileged to have over the last 59 years.
We got the signal of your age there, but I think what people can hear and what you've just said is, you're still saying these feelings, these attractions are still a part of my experience, and yet, I want to walk with other people so that they can find Jesus in that experience. And so
Absolutely.
you can hear that. I mean, conversion therapy, in that sense of, I think that what people have in their minds when they think about conversion therapy really isn't part of what Journey does. That,
No, not at all.
yeah,
Not at
we're
all.
just walking with people, and that was really my experience too. So, we have some things in common. We both grew up in fairly conservative Christian households. And, I've experienced same-sex attractions, from the time that I noticed that the guys around me were noticing girls, I was noticing other guys. And, but, having that sort of um, desire to follow Jesus and to follow my faith in that. As I got older, I eventually married a woman, and she knew about my experience, and we were making a marriage work. But eventually, after we'd been married for about 12 years, um, I encountered some friends and religious leaders who really started to say to me, well, how can you live this way when this is who you are? You're a gay man, and that's your identity. That's fundamental to who you are, and you can't deny that. You can't be a healthy person and and pretend that this isn't part of your experience. And I don't think I was trying to pretend it wasn't part of my experience, but I was trying to live faithful to what I'd been called to. And so these Christian leaders said to me, "No, you can't do this anymore. You have to live true. You have to live authentically to yourself." And this threw me into a massive crisis, because how do I hold my marriage together and identify as a
Right.
gay man at the same time? Like, that doesn't. I couldn't figure that out, and so I often say I began to experience a split, and it felt like there was this gay man on one hand and this husband and father and Christian on the other hand, and how do I reconcile these two things? And so what I did was, sort of manage the pain of that split with a lot of addictions, including drugs and alcohol. And so I knew that I was on a really dark path. And so I started to flail around. And one of the places that I looked to for help, like I think most people do these days, is I turned to Google. And I found Journey. It wasn't called Journey at the time, but I discovered Journey. And so when I got involved with Journey, I found a group of people who were willing to be honest about a whole range of experiences. Some had sort of experiences similar to mine, and they were wrestling with their sexuality, but there were lots of other experiences where it wasn't just about same-sex attraction. It was about lots of different things, but people being really honest and creating a safe place for people to encounter Jesus in those places of brokenness and shame. And it changed my life. It provided an encounter with Jesus that completely rearranged my priorities. And so rather than wrestling with my identity as a gay man, I began to root my identity in my relationship with Jesus, because I'd had a safe place to work through those issues. We all agreed that God's good plan for sexuality was marriage between a man and a woman, but nobody forced me into anything. Nobody sort of preached that at me. Nobody told me what conclusions I had to come to. They just listened to me, and then we took those experiences to Jesus. And so I think there's been accusations that conversion therapy is what Journey does, but really it's just this discipleship ministry.
Right.
But the reality is, under C-6, that Google search would probably be fruitless. I wouldn't have been able to find the support network that ultimately saved my marriage and saved my family life and allowed me to have that encounter with Jesus. And so, as we try and provide support with people who are working through their faith and their sexuality, we're really worried that this C-6 is actually going to start to interfere with our ability to reach out to people and let them know that there is a good plan that lends to our thriving, to our flourishing.
Right.
Yeah.
And also providing a safe place for people to actually come to.
Yeah. And I was reflecting on it this morning, and I thought, the thing that changed for me was not learning more about my sexuality or becoming more knowledgeable or aware of my sexuality. What changed for me was I had a genuine encounter with Jesus Christ,
Right.
and that changed everything. It just rearranged my priorities so radically that I was able to enter in joyfully to the life that I believe God was calling me to.
Right. I agree. That's very similar for me.
Yeah. So thanks very much. I think that's as much as we have time for, but I think it helps people to understand why we have concerns about C-6, that there are people who choose to live their faith and their sexuality out in different ways. And I hope people will begin to get a hold of their MPs and start to express these concerns, because these stories need to be told. They need to be heard.